Right, welcome back to the morning show here on the Rise News. I'm Rufai Oseni.
I am Adesua Omoron.
And I'm Soweto Atigare. Good morning.
All right, great. In spite of the agreement between the federal government and organized labor following the agreed consequential adjustments on the new minimum wage and the directives given by the Ministry of Labor and Employment for workers across the state to kindly negotiate with their state government for the implementation of the new minimum wage, the state governors have, through the Governors Forum, said that they will not pay beyond their individual capacity.
Now, this latest development has fired up the labor unions in Nigeria who disagree with the Governors Forum on the implementation of the 30,000 naira minimum wage across the states.
The Trade Union Congress said that there was an assurance from the Nigerian government that the official template for the adjustments will be released to labor this week, and that the state governments are only playing games by denying their responsibility and courting labor anger.
Games. Joining us now is Hassan Soweto, a public affairs analyst and a national coordinator of Education Rights Campaign, a non-governmental organization. He'll be looking at the growing confrontation between the Nigerian Labour Congress and the state governors over the implementation or denial of the new minimum wage. Soweto, let's talk about this.
So the collective,
let's talk about this. It looks as though that the state governors might be the ones to renege on this plan. We've gone back and forth. We've finally had a meeting. We've agreed. The state governors were in the know. I think so. You would want to raise the point that why don't you take the state governors to that negotiation? Because it's obvious now.
No. The state governors, they were part of the tripartite committee. The only place where they did not have representation, I believe, is the agreement on consequential adjustment.
Yeah.
And the baseline of the new wage is the 30,000. So that they have no excuse to say that they have to go and renegotiate with the labor leaders. Because the consequential adjustment is simply to determine what goes to each cadres on the basis of the 30,000. The 30,000 is the baseline, and it's a law. So that what the state government, the governors, what they are doing, if they say they are going to renege, it's actually a violation of the law. But this is not the first time.
But non-payment of salary is a violation of the law. And governors like that in Kogi State,
yes,
even have salaries. In Benue State, for over 30 months, we're not paying salaries. So it's as if they break the law. Who can hold them by it?
That's because, first and foremost, Nigeria, as a capitalist country, has two different kinds of laws. One for the rich and the other for the poor. Otherwise, the individual in Kogi State ought not to be standing for the election today. He ought to be on trial for wasting the lives of many working families. You know how many people who would have failed to pay their children's school fees, who would have lost loved ones because they could not afford, to pay for health care. But that's to show you first and foremost that we live in a country on the basis of a system that is unjust, that is anti-poor, and that needs to be overthrown in a revolutionary manner. But let me go to the question of the minimum wage itself. The first thing is that labor movement also has given the government the chance to be doing what they are doing today. During the period of the negotiation for the 30,000 minimum wage, and especially when the consequential adjustments was being debated, it was already clear from the body language of the federal government that they wanted to wear the labor leadership out through a prolonged negotiation process going nowhere. And the labor leadership kept shifting grants on the basis of the fact that they felt that, well, they did not want workers' demands for wage to hurt the economy. But you know that when you give your wrist, before you know, they will go for your elbow. And after that, they will go for your shoulder. We in the socialist movement demanded that the labor movement ought to call at least a one-day warning strike to send a signal, not only to the federal government, but to use that strike to send a signal to the governors who were waiting behind that the working people of this country will not accept anything less than 30,000. And this is important because even the old wage of 18,000.
The labor has become a toothless bulldog. That's what some people say. They can't call a viable strike any longer in this country.
It's the leadership that has turned it to a toothless bulldog. But for the millions of workers in this country, the capacity to shut down this economy still remains. The trade unions are still strong. But the leadership does not want to call out the power of the workers
but
because it is afraid.
Who will an industrial action benefit? Even the workers suffer for it. But let me ask you this. The state governors have an argument, and I want to know if that is legitimate for you. They say there are different number of workers at the state level, and every state has different issues. And so the wage should not be a blanket figure. Isn't that a legitimate argument for them?
It is not. There is one Nigerian economy. There is one market. The inflationary trend in Nigeria means that all of us will pay higher than our income for goods and services. Maybe only when you compare some cities that you can begin to see some variations. But what is key for all areas in the country today is that there is a sharp rise in the cost of goods and services compared to 4 years or 5 years ago. So that the argument that you can only pay workers according to what you can afford does not hold water here, because you cannot say, because a worker is in Enugu, he should not have the kind of wage that can allow him or her to take care of his family. Then secondly, the governors do not obey these laws when it comes to their own salary. So why should the Kogi state governor, who is owing workers in the state for over 30 months, be earning his own wage and then say that workers cannot earn their own? We have to go back to the root of this crisis, which is that it is only when it comes to workers' issue, when it comes to the needs of students, the needs of poor people, that the argument of lack of resources becomes something that is bandied around.
And true federalism.
True federalism. But when it comes to the wages of the lawmakers, buying vehicles, buying utilities and co, all of these things do not come up, which again goes back to what I said initially. It is a class society we live in. And the government in the 36 states at the federal level is made up of elements whose interest is to continue the status quo of mass poverty in the midst of plenty. Because that is how they themselves are able to accumulate their wealth. The working people needs to come together and fight. I want to urge the NSC, the TUC, across the 36 states to begin to mobilize. They should not behave like the national leadership to expect that the minimum wage will fall like an apple from the sky. They must be prepared for struggle right from the beginning. That is what can send a good signal to the governors that they have to quickly, resolve the issue. Otherwise, because don't forget, there are some states where even the 18,000 is not being paid, even in full. An example is Lagos State, which prides itself as the center of excellence. But it's a lie. When the minimum wage of 18,000 was implemented back in 2011, they used it to wipe out many of the special allowances that many categories of workers had won, like the TSA, which the NUT had won for teachers, so that at the end of the day, workers were shortchanged. I'm challenging the SESI-led leadership of the Nigerian Labour Congress in Lagos State not to allow this same kind of cheating and shortchange of workers to happen. And that requires that they are alert and they don't give in to any illusion. The government and the governors are not workers' friends.
But the current governor has actually said that he was going to implement the 30,000 naira
and
even pay above that.
Let us see the template. That was what they said. Fashola said that years back. And what did it amount to? Short-changing workers, wiping out allowances that workers had been won. Lagos State government, the APC-led government, is a master of deception, right from the period of Tinubu. And that is why the Labour leadership in Lagos State have a historical responsibility not to allow this same thing to happen this time around. And that requires alertness. Let us see the template. The template that will show whether the governor is actually...
Speaking about mobilization, you have said that, the workers have to rally around and do something about this. And even the president of the NLC, Mr. Ayuba Uba, actually called for workers to actually vote out certain governors who have refused to implement this. Do you consider this an extreme case, or it should be done?
I think it's even a very weak position for the labor movement. It ought to be sharper than that. And that's a challenge you are throwing to the leadership of the labor movement today. Because when you raise the slogan that workers should vote out, governors who are not paying salary, yes, it's a radical slogan. But to replace them with who? That's the point. In Kogi State, I'm sorry, but who can guarantee workers' wage among the candidates? These are parties that have been tested before. And all of them have, in many ways, impoverished the working people everywhere where they have ruled. And that is why the bottom line is that the labor movement itself needs to build a mass workers' party, a party that stands for the interest
but you
of
have
the working
Labour
people.
Party. You have the Labour Party. And we all saw how the story of the Labour Party went ding, ding, dong, and went down. It became a political satire. Now we have the Zenith Labour Party, or we have the Labour Party. So it just shows to a large extent that Labour cannot organize itself. A lot of people look at Labour today and say, it's a joke. That's why they can't organize a national strike. To a large extent. And there are several factions. United Labour, what is it called? Peter Esele was sitting on that seat. And he said the reason why the last strike didn't hold, because Pengasi is not with them. There's a big division between Pengasi and this is the common leadership of Nigerian Labour Congress. So what are you saying?
Yes, there is a correct point you have made, which is that we need more unity in the labour movement. But far above that is the need for ideological clarity, something which has been the bane, as far as I'm concerned, for the labour movement over time. There's no clear understanding for even a majority of labour leadership of what is that pathway to guarantee the best living standards for the working people. But if a majority of labour leaders today, they think that capitalism can still guarantee a progressive improvement in workers' living standards. Meanwhile, across the world, what we have seen is that this is not possible. Capitalism is no more progressive. We need to begin to look at an alternative, which we think is socialism. But without having this clear...
Which people argue against you and say, not in this century.
I will get that, sir. I will get that, sir. But because they lack this understanding, it also means that every step they take, it does not lead to any way out. For instance, the Labour Party that was formed, it was partly because of the agitation of organizations like the Democratic Socialist Movement that compelled Labour leadership to take that step. But I agree with you today. That party is only Labour in name. It does not represent the interest of the labouring masses. But for us in the DSM...
That same party had a governor in Ondo, in Ondo State, that came in under the Labour Party banner and didn't still pay salaries.
That's exactly what are you saying? I said that it is only Labour in name. Okay, look at what do you call it? The amount of money to pay to become candidate of the party. Does that mean that even when you look at that the Labour Party expects a worker to be a candidate in the party? The amount, the fee, is as high as the fee of that of the PDP. So in many ways, that party does not represent the labouring mass. And that's why we are making the demand again that the labour movement must take another step of constructing a new party. There will be a combat party, not just an electoral party, but a combat party of the working class. Because we are not just talking about electoral politics. We are talking about a party that can, first and foremost, provide the working masses a political and economic agenda to begin to restructure Nigeria in accordance with the interest of the mass majority of the people. And it is doable. We have the Socialist Party of Nigeria, which we have registered, which we intervened in the last election. And our challenge to the labour movement is that this party can be the starting point even for constructing a new party for the working class.
We'll come back to discuss if you see reasoning prevailing or a looming industrial action, but that will be after this break. Please join us again on The Morning Show. Welcome back to The Morning Show here on Arise News. And we're still having a studio with us, Hassan Soweto, a public affairs analyst and national coordinator of Education Rights Campaign, a non-governmental organization, talking about the implementation of the consequential adjustment of the national minimum wage. It's a mouthful. And I was just asking you, because Labour has set up a standing committee to monitor the negotiation of this consequential adjustments at the 36 states, including the federal capital. And I'm wondering, do you see reasoning prevailing from the body language and the rhetorics of the governor, or do you see a looming industrial action? Because the Governors Forum did say there seems to be a new definition to what minimum wage is. And let me tell you what the governors have said. They said this is a national minimum wage increase, not a general minimum wage review. So what do you think?
I do not. I studied English a bit too. Why going? So I don't understand what. But like clearly, like we have said, it's typical of the governors. They find all excuses to try and evade their responsibility. But what determines what would happen, who will prevail, is the balance of force and the ability of the labour movement to pull out its forces to compel the governors to pay. See, the labour movement cannot expect otherwise from the government.
on that Lagos assertion. Because the talk is, and when we all have this conversation is, Lagos pays 18,000. In fact, Lagos is the first state to pay 18,000. In fact, Lagos is also one of the first states to say we're going to pay this 30,000.
And above.
And above. So what are you saying? What is this thing you're saying against Lagos State? What am I hearing?
I mean,
prove yourself,
for the workers in Lagos State, if you ask them, they will show you with evidence that the 18,000 naira minimum wage implemented in Lagos State does not conform to the full implementation, especially when you look at how some of the special allowances that have been won by different categories of workers were wiped out in the process of implementation. Because when they talk about consequential adjustment, why did you think that it took that long to resolve? It is because the taste of the pudding is serving in the eating. You can say you have given 30,000, but what does 30,000 mean for a level 9, a level 13, a level this officer? That is what is important. And that is where the governors are also waiting for the leadership of labor at the state level. But what they will want to do is to say, well, we are paid 30,000, which is simply for the lowest level of workers, 1 to 6. But for the others, everything they want to do will only amount to 2,500 naira addition, 5,500 naira addition to salary. Something which will not mean any improvement. Because in struggling for a minimum wage review, what the labor leadership wants to achieve is that even on the basis of the current situation in the economy, some marginal improvement in workers' welfare. Something which would therefore mean that the output must actually lead to improvement in terms of workers being able to meet their needs. But when as a level 12 officer, everything that gets to you as your minimum wage is 7,500 naira attached to your salary, excuse me, how does it conform to a minimum wage? And that is why the question of the template, I repeat, has to be the starting point of the discussion. If the Lagos State governor is actually ready to fulfill his promise, publish the template. Let us see. Individual workers will be the ones to begin to celebrate the governor for fulfilling his promise. But even in the other states where they are not even paying the 18,000, whether in full or marginally, that is where our attention needs to be turned to. Look at Osun State. Look at Kogi. Even Ekiti that they are talking about, where the chairman of the governors forum comes from. Exactly how much have they implemented? How many areas do they have of workers? And that is why the labor leadership in the different states should not in any way go into these negotiations with the illusion that they can win it without struggle. It's better to be prepared. It is better to be prepared. And that means that as they are sending letters to their governors, asking for meetings to begin to negotiate, Congresses must be called to begin to mobilize the forces.
So talking about that, I was reading in Disney newspaper this morning that JSNPNC, I mean, it's a mouthful. It's beginning to train the negotiators on how they'll negotiate. What should they tell? Because that's a critical point. What should they tell them on how to negotiate as that training starts?
Well, for me, I mean, there are technical details which labor experts can best put forward. But for me, politically, point that all labor negotiators must put forward is that workers have a right to their wage. Workers are the creators of wealth. Argument about the economy not growing well can no more be an excuse to continue to shortchange workers. The ruling elite are the ones who should give away their privileges to be able to accommodate workers. Because you can't tell a man who is hungry, who has not eaten for days, to persist in hunger just because the food in the store is not enough. It means that those of you who are eating too much are the ones who should shorten your ration. But what is happening in Nigeria today is that those who are already filled up are telling those who have not eaten for days that they should further persist in hunger. The president is in Saudi Arabia today, and then from there he's going to take a rest in London. On whose money? On all of us, our own resources, our taxes, the natural resources of this country and the revenue. That is where they are getting all of this money from. How do you cut all of this? Salaries of political office holders, how can it be slashed? I don't think that the labor movement ought to have negotiated the minimum wage review without a review of the wages of political office holders. They should have made that demand, part of the demand put forward. as workers' wages going up, politicians' salary is coming down. Because that is the only way we can begin to put forward the kind of program that can begin to provide a way out for our problems. Because the problem of Nigeria, really, at root, is not lack of resources. We have seen this country negotiate minimum wage when the economy was growing at 7%, and the governors still behaved in this same manner.
No,
and we are seeing it again when the economy is growing at a very low rate. Okay, so
and yet, the same argument. I want to come into this conversation.
Yes, I just want to look at the timeline of everything that has happened, because it almost seems as if we have put the cart before the horse. This conversation we're having now, this collective bargaining agreements we're having now, don't you think that should have been had even before? We know that President Buhari put this signed this into law as far back as April. And it took such a long time for the NLC to even reach an agreement saying that, okay, you know what, we're going to start paying now this 30,000. Then we're now having this CAB coming up. Don't you think the timeline of it is distorted? The state governors should have this conversation should have been had before the agreement was signed off by the NLC, not after. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's not exactly, for me, from the way I see it, from a distance, it's not exactly the fault of the NLC in this regard. It is that the state governors, they always put up every obstacle to delay the implementation, and it pays them. The more they prolong it, the more the arrears is piling up, something which they would not pay. So what that therefore means is that before workers in many states begin to even enjoy this implementation, could be far into next year. Because if the governors had representation on the tripartite committee, and even without being a tripartite committee, I mean, the government, the active negotiation carried out by the federal government on behalf of Nigeria, I mean, has always been binding, especially one that brings economic benefit to the country. It's only the ones that would compel the state government to put down money to meet people's needs that always makes them to begin to jump at argument of federalism, the need for them to be part of it. So that ordinarily it ought not to be a problem. But what they are trying to do is to put forward as much argument, as much excuse as much as possible. And that is why they are prolonging it. And for the labor movement, they need to be clear about what they want to do. There has to be a clear timeline put forward. Because when you also look at what has happened nationally, the federal government is saying they will pay arrears on or before December 31st. That's not categorical enough. Because exactly why would the implementation itself have to delay up to that point? Let's suppose federal workers have started receiving their minimum wage increment alongside with the arrears. That helps to give a clear signal to the state government that they're on their own and that the federal government is already. But when you also continue to delay, you are sending the wrong signal to the state governors that there's nothing at stake. And all of this is dependent on how the negotiation itself was done. There was no fear put into the minds of either the federal government or that of the state government. And we are talking of the state government now. Nobody is talking about the private employers of labor. Indeed. And that's where the minimum wage never even gets implemented at all.
It is worrisome that we have to put fear in the minds of the government or employers to ensure that they do implement and are law-abiding. But talking about negotiations and the way forward, some argue that a sustainable way for this is to begin to think about devolution of powers from the center as it regards workers' negotiation and wages. And that's the exclusive and concurrent list movement. They say this will give the state governors leeway to negotiate what they can afford to pay the government, instead of having these unending negotiations back and forth.
I've said it that it's not a question of what they can afford. We need to.
Did you see the budget report recently that says only 3 states can afford to cater for their recurrent expenditure without going to the federal government?
What is the security votes of those states? The first question. Because we have also seen states that have very huge budgets. And yet, when you look at the quantum of development in those states, it doesn't correspond to those. See, resources...
You want to talk about Bielsa, for instance?
Oh, yes, for instance. I mean, so it's not just about the quantum of funds. It's about how it is managed. The philosophy of governance in Nigeria, on the basis of capitalism, is that the interest of the working people of the poor is not even. in the purview of government. It is sometimes what falls from the tree that ordinary people try to benefit from. But in terms of government deliberately wanting to put money in education, put money in healthcare, put money in providing for workers' wage, that is never something that is willingly done, by any of the governments in Nigeria, whether state or federal. And that's because of that philosophy. So, for me, whether you devolve it, in fact, when you even do devolution, that's when you have the greatest problem. And that's why, for us, when you even talk about the question of true federalism, the point we socialists put is that once the economic foundation of society remains as it is, no way you reconstruct Nigeria that it will lead to the outcome that we want. And the outcome that we want at all times is that the mass majority of this country should benefit from the resources of this country.
That's a good place to leave it. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Hassan Soweto. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing with us with your great insights here.